Hello, my friends, and everyone interested in this ancient text called the Bible and the book of Exodus. We are going to finish up chapter 4, go through chapter 6, and we're going to discover some really interesting stuff where Moses' wife, Tziporah, conducts some priestly duties, and Moses just won't stop bitching and complaining about what God is asking him to do. We're also going to discover that because of Moses' resistance, God is going to have to almost use plan B to save his people and lead them to become a nation that's going to be blessing to the entire world. The Bible's about to get very real. We're probably going to get a little bit colorful. Heads up warning, we will be getting a little bit graphic as we talk about some circumcision items, so be ready for that. Buckle up and welcome to Dumb Christian. So as we finish up chapter 4, go into 5 and 6, we're going to discover that the chronological order here is a little bit confusing, a little bit messed up. And sometimes we find that in the ancient Hebrew writings. They don't necessarily go in order, but this, especially at the end of chapter 4, it's a little bit confusing. So I highly recommend go read it for yourself. And as a heads up, I really want to encourage you guys, especially when it comes to confusing stuff like Exodus, we're going to get into Leviticus, Numbers eventually. Check out the book down in the details, the description below, how not to read the Bible. I think that's really going to help shed some light, and I'm going to really encourage us to check that book out as we continue on through the rest of the Bible. But we're going to have to use our imagination as we explore the chronological order of what happens next. Because if you remember, at the end of our last video, God told Moses, go meet Aaron. I've already gone ahead of you. I've already tapped him on the shoulder. I've already prepared him, told him to meet you out here at Sinai. And Moses, if you remember, has the whole time he's just been whining and complaining about, God, I don't want to do this. Send somebody else. They're not going to listen. Wah, wah, wah. And God keeps compromising with him, right? He keeps making concession after concession. Okay, I'll do this. I'll do this. I'll do this. But I'm going to go with you. Okay. Well, Moses is still reluctant, and he's kicking his feet. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. So God says, go meet Aaron. And what he does instead is he goes back to his father-in-law's, Jethro, remember the priest of Midian, and he kind of tells his family, all right, I had this crazy encounter. I don't know if you guys are going to believe me, but Yahweh, the God of Abraham. Remember, Jethro and Abraham and Moses share an ancestor, Abraham, right? Because if you go back far enough, they share that lineage, their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather or whatever. And his God appeared to me and said he's going to use me to free the slaves in Egypt, the Israelite slaves. What? Jethro's like, oh, snap. I wish I had a conversation with Yahweh God like that. Tziporah's like, okay. And, there's kind of this, are you for real? And Moses is like, well, check this out. Throws his staff down, turns into a snake, picks it up, back into a staff, hand, leprous white, put it back in, bring it back out. It's clean. Goes through the whole thing, and they are on board. Okay, if that's what God is going to have you do, then let's go do it. So Moses is like, okay, fine. I guess we'll go if you guys think I should go. So Moses, his wife Tziporah, and at least their son Gershon. We know, I think later in chapter 18, we meet Moses' second son, Eleazar. And, but we're just going to have to guess that all of them went as they left to go back to Egypt. We're like, well, if we're going to go, we're going to do it as a family. Let's go. They start to head back towards Egypt, which, by the way, we're going to have to get to probably Sinai or Mount Horeb, right, in Sinai, where God met Abraham and told him to meet Aaron there, is probably somewhere in between Midian and Egypt. So they're headed towards Egypt. Sinai's got to be on the way. But before they get very far, Moses gets sick. And the Bible says that God wanted to kill Moses. Okay, this is where things get really confusing because it's like, well, which happened first? What's the order of things that are taking place? And why in the world would God want to kill Moses? I mean, he's already gone through the whole rigmarole of like listening to Moses come up with every and any excuse to get out of this and making concession after concession, compromising with him. Okay, why in the world would God want to kill Moses? Okay, God is about to use Moses, and he has repeatedly made it very clear that Moses has no interest in participating in this uncomfortable adventure. God promised Abraham hundreds of years ago, I'm going to protect you, preserve you, and I'm going to use your family to make a nation. They're going to be slaves in Egypt for 400 years, but I will save them. Moses doesn't want to be a part of that covenant process. He's not interested in the discomfort of being used by God to free really his nation, his people. And there's an element of this that gets a little bit too much. It crosses a line. And there, as the story unfolds, it appears to have something to do with circumcision. This is where we're going to get a little bit graphic. So heads up, if you want to skip to the next part, I don't know at which minute marker you're going to have to skip to. Just keep going 30 seconds until you get past the gross stuff. Okay. Scholars say there was an Egyptian practice of circumcision, but it was completely unlike the Israelite practice of circumcision. The Israelites practice removing, when a baby male is 8 days old, what they do is they are brought to the patriarch or the priest, and they'll perform the circumcision, which is taking a flint knife and cutting off the foreskin of the penis. Now, this is really important because it is an identifier to make sure this is preserving the people of God. And later, this is going to be, later in life, as the child becomes a man, it will be the indicator to his wife on their wedding night, right? Hey, this is the confirmation that you have indeed preserved the people of Israel by marrying an Israelite. You can check the box, seen, sealed, confirmed, circumcised. Now, Moses was a baby boy. We don't know the level to which circumcision had been practiced while they're in Egypt. So we don't know if when he was 8 days old, he was circumcised, or, the Yochebed was hiding Moses and trying to protect him. And when he was discovered, maybe in an effort to try and protect him from being identified as an Israelite or a Hebrew, she didn't circumcise him. We don't know. There's nothing in the Bible that indicates Moses was circumcised. But the Egyptian practice of circumcision, which is very likely what Moses did have, is not a removal of the foreskin, but it's actually just a splitting of the foreskin to kind of peel back that skin and, increase the sexual pleasure experience for the wing wang. And so that practice of circumcision was very, very different from the Israelite practice of circumcision. And this will actually play much later once they get closer to the promised land, when God says, circumcise everyone a second time, because it's not removing the circumcision or the foreskin twice. It's, fully removing the foreskin as opposed to just splitting it down the middle, like was the Egyptian process or the custom. So what we see here, Moses is sick. He is supposed to be leading the people of God in freedom, in liberation, and he has not yet identified himself as a person of God. You want to lead? You're leading by example. Get circumcised properly, according to the covenant of Abraham. And this is really like, God's been getting pissed off and frustrated with Moses, but this is kind of like the line in the sand where it's like, come on, get your shit together, bro. Of course you have to do this. You're going to lead my people into this covenant promise. You better have that indicator. Okay, Moses is sick. He's on his deathbed. They didn't get very far. They set up camp like maybe 1 or 2 days journey from Midian, and he's about to die. Tziporah, his wife, understands something significant about circumcision. Now, they're from the lineage of Abraham. Again, Midian, the son of Abraham, passed down through generations. Here's Jethro. They understand circumcision as the covenant sign. But for some reason, it's not necessarily practiced in their family, in their household. But she's aware of it. She understands the significance of it. And she somehow connects that Moses is sick because he isn't properly circumcised. However, Moses is supposed to be going to Egypt. We don't have time to wait for him to get snipped and healed. This can take a couple of weeks, even if not longer, before he's fully healed, ready to go. And so what she does, in an understanding that this is what needs to happen, she goes and she circumcises their son Gershon, who clearly has not yet been circumcised. And what she does is she takes the flint knife, cuts the foreskin off of Gershon's penis, and then the Bible says that she throws the foreskin on Moses' feet. What we need to understand is, in this kind of context, the word feet is actually a Hebrew euphemism for junk. We actually see it a few times where, and she spread her feet to birth. The afterbirth spilt on her feet. Ruth laid at the feet of Boaz. Really, these are euphemisms for the ding dong, or the hoo hoo. There you go. But so what she does, it's a nice way of painting the picture that she goes, circumcises Gershon, takes Gershon's foreskin, throws open Moses' robes, and slaps Gershon's foreskin on Moses' as like a temporary circumcision by proxy. Okay. And this happens to be enough of like a temporary stopgap where it's identifying, hey, this needs to be your priority as soon as possible. We're not doing it right now because you have got a job to do, but this needs to be priority number 1 as soon as you get a chance. Okay. When that happens, what is occurring is Tziporah is actually acting in a priestly manner, actually as the patriarch or priest of the family, because she's doing the duty of circumcision. And this opens a floodgate of like women in ministry, and that's not really the scope of what we're trying to accomplish here. To really get into that, but it is an interesting note maybe to consider, right? What's actually going on here? And if you're very much into scholarly research or whatever, it's a lot more confusing when it comes to roles in ministry and gender. It's not as easily spelled out as sometimes it's made to be. And this is just another example where the hero of the story is a woman behaving in a patriarchal and priestly manner in order to honor God. And God's okay with that in this situation for some reason. Okay, Moses, he understands the importance, the value, priority number 1. He gets better. They set back on their journey and they get to Sinai where they meet up with Aaron. And Aaron says, "Oh, it's so great to see you. It's been 40 years." Again, it was 40 years while he was in Exodus in Egypt, and then it's been 40 years that he's been in the wilderness. Now he's going back to Egypt. Man, it's been a long time. How are you, brother? And he sees his now sister-in-law and his nephews, and he says, I'm so glad to meet you guys. I'm really happy to see you. However, Egypt is not a good place for you. We are slaves. And it's gotten worse. So if you're making this hey, let's go vacation in Egypt, it's not going to be like that. There's no 5-star hotels. There's not even a Super 8 motel. If at best you're sleeping on the ground in slaves' quarters, and it's very likely that you will get pulled into slave labor as well. Why don't you guys just for the time being go home? And once this whole ordeal is finished, we'll meet back up with you guys. Moses, Zipporah agree. They kiss goodbye. Bye, honey. See you. Okay. Moses and Aaron make their way to Egypt. Again, Aaron is going to be the mouthpiece. So he doesn't hear directly from God. He hears from Moses, who hears from God. This is actually going to cause a problem, which we're going to get to at the end of chapter 6 here in just a little bit. Aaron leads Moses into the slave quarters where all the elders are gathered and meeting. Listen up, you guys. My brother has something incredible to say. And it's been 40 years, so who knows if they remember Moses or what they remember about him, if anything at all. And here he comes and he says, "The God of Abraham, our forefathers, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph has appeared to me, and he told me he's heard the cries of his people, and he is going to liberate all of the slaves. He's actually going to fulfill his promise that he made to Abraham, that covenant promise, and he's going to take everyone into the promised land, free them from slavery in Egypt, and give them a land flowing with milk and honey." Now, of course, this sounds great, but is it true? Oh yeah, by the way, I've got some signs. Here's the stick. And I'm taking some liberties here. Here's the stick, turned into a snake, back into a staff. My hand, leprous, white, flaky, put it back in, bring it back out. Baby bottom soft, brand new skin. And maybe he had to show him the third one as well, with the water from the Nile into blood. They start to get really excited. They start spreading word. You guys, God has heard us. He's going to save us. And there's someone with miraculous powers who's verifying that this is actually going to happen. Okay, so they bring Aaron and Moses to their slave drivers. Hey, we need to speak to your boss, Pharaoh. They finally make their way up the chain of authority. They get to Pharaoh in his presence, and he says, What are these Hebrews doing here? And, Moses speaks to Pharaoh or to Aaron, and Aaron does the talking, but the conversation goes like this. "The God of the Hebrews, Yahweh, has appeared to us and wants us to go worship him. And we can't just do it here in town. It's going to be a major problem if the Egyptians see the Hebrews sacrificing, abominable sacrifices and worshiping a God that is not the Egyptian God, right? Like, this is going to cause problems. So we have to go out into the wilderness to worship our God, Yahweh." Now, we've talked about this a little bit before, but Pharaoh is the physical manifestation of the Egyptian god Horus. He has some godly responsibilities and duties, which are going to be very important once we get to the plagues next time. But in essence, Pharaoh, as the God king, he says, "Who is Yahweh that I should care? I don't give a shit about your God. Who is Yahweh that I should even consider what he has to say?" And, the conversation, Moses and Aaron, well, Yahweh is the God of the Israelites. He's not like your gods. He's very different to your gods. And he is demanding that we go a 3-day journey into the wilderness to worship, make sacrifices. And the idea is we'll come back. Pharaoh doesn't like this. Horus incarnate says, "Well, what? You want a week off? 3 days there, a day to worship, 3 days back? If you'll even come back? No, I don't think so. That ain't happening." And so what Pharaoh does instead is he actually increases the labor. He said, if you guys had time to come up with this story, this plot to, trick me, you must have too much free time on your hands. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to increase the amount of work you have to do. So the Israelite slaves did all the hard labor. And the main job that seems to be the prominent one here in the story is they made bricks. So the Egyptian farmers would go do their job, and then they would bring the leftover straw, drop it off at the slave straw drop box. And then the slaves would have straw to put in their mud and clay to make bricks. And Pharaoh says, from now on, we're not going to give you straw. You have to go get it yourself. So not only do they have the hard labor of making, building, and transporting bricks, they have to go acquire straw, carry, transport, bring in, and then make bricks. It probably doubles the workload that they have to accomplish. And then he says, we're going to have to actually make you keep making the same number of bricks. You just won't have straw to do it. Take that and let's see how much time you have. And the Israelite slaves go from do this total 180, because in one moment they're like, yay, God's going to save us. He hears us. He's going to free us. And then their workload doubles and they say, what the hell, Moses? Who do you think you are? We never asked you to come save us. And they just get pissed off at Moses and Aaron. And they're like, screw you guys. We had it better before you guys showed up. We thought you were going to save us, but you just made things worse. And Moses is like, God, what is happening? And God's like, I warned you. This is all part of the process. Pharaoh's hardening his heart. He doesn't want to acknowledge that I am God, that he isn't God. And I am going to do something that not only reveals who I am to the Egyptians and to Pharaoh, but also this is something to teach the Israelites, because they don't understand the importance of trusting God and obeying God. And so we're actually going to start to see two patterns that really kind of emerge here in the story that are prevalent through the rest of the Old Testament for sure, and probably bits and glimpses that we can see in the New Testament as well. And the first is this human condition that I think we all go through, at least I know I go through, that when life doesn't go our way, it doesn't, flow with the expectation, like the Israelites are waiting for freedom from slavery. It doesn't happen. They turn around and they shake their fists. God, why did you do this to me? I thought you were my friend. I thought you cared about me. I thought you loved me. And now things are just worse. Right? They don't see the whole picture. And that's kind of like the human condition. When things don't go our way, God gets the blame for it. But then there's this other picture that we see that God is trying to teach through Moses. Moses doesn't have the instructions on how it's going to work. He doesn't have the step-by-step details of do this, this, and this, and then this. He's only given one step at a time, and God says, go do this. He doesn't know why he's doing that or exactly how it's going to play out. All he knows is, I'm walking in obedience to God. And that's a theme that God is trying to help tie these two pictures together, that obedience is better than understanding why God has asked you to do this, because it plays out in the long run, and you can see through faithfulness, the goodness, and the plan that he has as he works through people who are obedient, even when they don't know why. And he says to Moses, I haven't in the past revealed myself by my name. And this is a really interesting, we're not going to get into this too much, but when God told Moses his name, Yahweh, I am present, I am the God, we know that there was some sort of knowledge of God's name before this, because Moses' mother, Yocheved, actually consists of Yud, part of God's name. And so they have some sort of understanding of who this God is, but what God is saying ultimately is that I'm going to reveal who I am in the fullest measure. People are going to experience me and know who I am on a level that has never been known before. And then God uses some language that's maybe a little bit confusing to us, or might just sound like poetic in nature, but he uses, I'm going to stretch out my strong arm. I will deliver by my strong hand. And this language is actually going to mean something to the original readers, the Hebrews that have been saved from slavery. You see, because Egypt, for a long time, also had control over the tribes in Canaan, which is where the Israelites are going. And they're reading about Pharaoh, Egypt, Exodus, freedom. And this language is going to sound very similar to an Egyptian word, Kepesh, which is actually a name given to many pharaohs. And it has to do with the fact that they are the representative, the avatar, or the physical manifestation of the god Horus, who strong-armed the other god, Set. And Horus became like the top dog god of Egypt because he strong-armed the other gods. So when God says, I will use my mighty outstretched hand, I have a mighty strong arm that I will use against Pharaoh, the language is actually undermining the way that Pharaoh has elevated himself and the way that all of Egypt has glorified and worshipped Pharaoh, Horus, the gods of Egypt. Yahweh God is using that kind of language to say, I am going to undo everything they think is great about themselves. But Pharaoh will harden his heart. And Moses is back to bitching and moaning, complaining. God, I told you they weren't going to listen to me. Pharaoh didn't listen. Now the Israelites turned against me. Moses had a brief moment of like hope and like, oh, maybe this is going to work out when the Israelites believed him at first. But now it's like flipped on its head and it's not going to work. I told you. And Moses' complaining here actually is a very significant thing. He's been doing it over and over and over and over till God finally made the compromise, and he said, okay, I'll have Aaron be your mouthpiece. We can see that earlier in Genesis when we met Melchizedek, the king of Salem and the high priest, God's original design was to have one person embody both the leader of the people and the priest of the people. And in God's original call for Moses, it was for him to be leader and priest, to lead the people and to be the godly representative. The person who goes between, represents God to the people and the people to God. But Moses refuses to play along. And this is where Aaron comes into play. And so once we get into the Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and once the law is given and the priestly duties are assigned, God assigns those roles to the line of Aaron, to the descendants of Aaron, because here the role of leader and priest split into two roles instead of the one that God had originally designed, and which we're going to see are rejoined and reunited back together in Jesus Christ, King and High Priest. But here, Moses almost like forces God to go with a plan B and say, well, pick somebody else to help because I can't do this. And so we get this really weird genealogy at the end, like in chapter 6. And we've talked about how genealogies are important for people to understand where they came from, their heritage, but it's also really important to identify the personalities and qualities of the people in the story, i.e. here, Moses and Aaron. They're both from a bloodline, and the genealogy says these are the same, Aaron and Moses, who saved the people out of Egypt. There's something interesting that happens here because Moses tends to be the guy that's highlighted and elevated in the story, talked most about. But in this genealogy, Aaron is mentioned first. It's possible that it's because he's older, but typically and traditionally, the person named first is elevated and given a little bit more status than the second person mentioned for whatever reason. And a lot of scholars suggest that this is because the author wants the readers to understand that Aaron and Moses are co-equal leaders. They're on the same level. And this is going to cause problems later once we are liberated from Egypt, which we'll obviously get to down the road. But at this point, the genealogy is added for the purpose of identifying that Aaron and Moses are equally important in what's about to happen. They are co-rulers and they share the responsibilities. They are equal. One is not greater than the other. And there's an interesting element of the genealogy that's spelled out here. Their father married his own aunt. Now, this is going to be illegal later down the line when we get the law. And it really drives home this point that, you guys, there's nothing special about these guys. There's nothing magical about them. There's nothing, really special. They didn't do anything. They don't come from some royal bloodline. In fact, they come from like kind of a perverted bloodline, but God still uses them. And it's not because they're special, but it's because they're obedient. even when they don't know what's going to happen and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Again, we're going to explore that in the next few chapters, which I'm really excited about because we're getting into the plagues. So check us out next time because we'll get into that later. But check us out on YouTube if you're not watching there. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you like about Exodus so far. Be sure to check out How Not to Read the Bible. Hit subscribe, like, ring the bells. Share this with your friends so we don't go on this journey alone. And I will catch you in the next one. I love you guys.